I would like to tell you the story of a dog's loyalty in a time of cruelty. This story happened to one of the family members. She was a woman who treated animals well and was very kind to them. She married a man who lived in the city and had families in the villages. One day, she was in her husband's family's house, and one of them brought a small, stray female dog that had lost its mother. They insisted on putting it near another village because they did not like raising dogs for fear of their children attacking them if the dog grew up or eating the sheep. But she insisted on raising the dog and taking responsibility for it until it grew up and she could take care of itself. They agreed to her request because she was beloved by them. And so the dog was raised with her, and she had a young son who was 4 years old, and he loved the dog very much and played with it all the time. The dog grew up to have puppies, but the villagers insisted on killing the puppies because they might hurt them when they grew up. She tried to convince her husband not to let them do that, but he did not care about the matter and asked her not to interfere and warned her from the beginning about the consequences of raising dogs. So when she returned to the village after a while, she found that the puppies had disappeared, and she could not discuss the matter with them or open the subject in front of them. But she remained sad as she looked at the dog whose face was filled with sadness and pain for parting with her puppies. After a long time, the woman became pregnant with twins and was very optimistic and happy, and did not alert the dog that was sleeping by the door and accidentally stepped on her, and the dog barked in pain. Then the woman was frightened and noticed her and hugged her while she was crying and apologizing to her, and the women were laughing at her. "Is it reasonable for you to apologize to the dog while you are a human?" She replied to them and said, "You do not know what punishment awaits me, because I hurt the animal, and what calamity may befall me because of her prayer against me." One day, it happened that she was in the city with her husband, and her son was in the village with his family, and she was supposed to come to the village on the same day, but circumstances happened and she decided to come the next day. She felt a prick of pain in her chest and anxiety. She did not know what it was, so she told her husband, but he reassured her that it was just exhaustion. After an hour, the house phone rang, so she rushed to answer the phone, fearing someone unknown. The caller was one of her husband's family members and asked about her husband. She replied that he had gone out to run a short errand and would be back. She insisted on knowing the reason for the call, so he told her that the neighbor's son, so-and-so, had died. She could not control herself from crying. The child was a year older than her son, and they were friends in the neighborhood. She knew very well that her son would not leave his friend except when spending the night. She did not understand what she was thinking, and did something bad happen to her son? Her doubts overcame her a lot. Her husband came, so she told him about the death, and they went to the village. She cried all the way, not knowing why she was still worried, and would not calm down until she saw her son. She arrived at her husband's family's house, and saw her son frozen and crying alone in the room, not wanting to see anyone, and asking for his mother with terrible insistence. She could not control herself from crying as she saw her 7-year-old son shaking like a leaf while hugging her tightly and repeating, "My friend so-and-so has gone to God." After the woman calmed her son down and he fell asleep in her arms, she put him in his bed. She went to offer her condolences to the family of the deceased when they told her the story of the child's death. The wall collapsed on him while he was playing with her son, but the dog came and barked loudly at the two children, circling around herself and them, but the two children insisted on continuing to play without paying attention to her barking. She would pull the deceased child at times and return to the woman's son, insisting on pulling him by his clothes away from the wall, so the child gave in and went with her. Suddenly, the wall collapsed on the deceased child, and he died, and parts of his body were scattered under the weight of the wall. All this while the child watched her, stunned and afraid of the sight of blood. He was holding the dog, whose voice had become soft and resembled a sad moan. Then the woman cried a lot because God gave her son a new life, and she thanked him profusely and looked for the dog but did not find her. For a week the dog kept whining and refusing food until she died, and she was never seen again after that day. The woman remembered the day the dog brought the body of her frozen puppy and sat crying at her feet. The woman insisted on digging a small grave for the body of the puppy and buried it in it. Then the dog sniffed the woman and circled around her as if thanking her. The woman smiled at the dog and did not understand at all why she did this. The dog loved to play with the children of the village, especially the two children, and they fed her and took great care of her. But she realized that God knows what calamities and misfortunes befall us in fate, and we do not realize the value of mercy and kindness to animals until a day comes when you repel the calamity from yourself with the good charity that you gave while you were unaware of the nature of the calamity that God will test you with. The woman kept remembering that incident throughout her life, and she never forgot the loyalty of the dog. I was very affected when I heard the story, and kept thinking, is what I heard reasonable? But it happens that you hear a story and wonder about it inside you. Is it from the imagination or from reality? But there are stories in life that affect hearts and bring tears to eyes. And from them you find wisdom, and from them a lesson. But we remain human, and the dog remains loyal to its owner. Dogs are among the most beautiful living creatures that belong to the family of domesticated creatures available in the world, and are represented by one breed of animals called animals that have a strong relationship with humans. As we find that today, there are approximately 400 breeds of dogs on Earth, but they descend from the same type, as their shapes and functions differ, as there are guard dogs, and there are hunting dogs, and there are ornamental dogs. But it is known in all of these categories that dogs in general are very loyal creatures to humans. Thus, you find that dogs tend to sit with humans and carry out their orders more than any other animals, and thus they are dealt with. The dog has actually helped humans since the dawn of history, and is considered one of the pets that are next to humans when they are needed. Thus, we find that it is the only animal that is used in guard duties, despite the presence of